Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks for attending this session. This theme is migration, and I think really has been quite interesting so far this morning, hearing the speakers and trying to sort of lay out the pieces of this puzzle in understanding employment, workplaces, integration, professions, identities. I think it all fits quite nicely. What I'm going to present on is employment integration of newcomers into one Canadian mid-sized city as a case example of what that might look like across Canada. And this is really embedded within a larger program of work with some of my colleagues. Which is truly interdisciplinary. So I think is also a major theme of this conference. So I have some of my co-authors here on the slide. Some of you may know them, Dr. Bruce Newbold, Dr. Andrew Bowman, and Dr. Margaret Walton-Roberts, all representing different disciplines. And together we've come to address this question of employment integration and how can small and mid-sized cities across the country integrate newcomers efficiently, effectively, and with productive employment, which I'll talk about shortly. So this particular work that I'm presenting today is based on this one study, which is published. So if you're interested in reading more about it, it is there. So really, I just want to set the context. We all know that in Canada, we rely quite heavily on immigration. Immigration drives our population growth, and it also drives our economic growth. So it's really important that policies and programs and systems are organized well so that we can support newcomers when they arrive. We also know that there are a lot of issues with immigration, and certainly through the media, especially more recently, we've seen there are quite the ebbs and flows around immigration and anti-immigrant sentiments that have emerged, changes in policies that really sort of drive the public discourse on how people feel about newcomers coming into Canada. And part of that really does focus a lot on labor, and it focuses a lot on employment. And you have all heard sort of that negative rhetoric that newcomers come and they take our jobs. And really, so this is a myth that has been perpetuated over time for many, many years. And really the research shows that that is not the case. And so some of this work has also been emerging from some of that, unpacking some of that sort of discourse. The other important piece is around the meso issue levels when we talk about immigration. So immigration as a system, the selection occurs federally. It's a shared responsibility between the federal and the provincial governments, and a little bit less so on the municipal governments. But really what happens at the federal level impacts what happens provincially, but truly the integration happens at that community level and at that city level. And so if there aren't proper systems in place, once the immigrants arrive, then we see that more challenges arise for them. And then finally, there are the micro issues, and that's really sort of the impact on the individual and trying to understand what does it mean for individual when they arrive. Usually through the economic stream, we have very highly skilled, highly educated newcomers that come in, many with professions, and when they arrive, they really struggle to first get their credentials recognized, and secondly, to find that sort of first Canadian job that aligns with those skills and qualifications. And so through a lot of data and interviews that we've done with some of these newcomers, we hear a lot about some of the health impacts of that. So there's a lot of stress associated with that, and there's a lot of frustration and disillusion around the idea of what it meant, the expectations they had coming to Canada, where this is supposed to be a place of opportunity, but they're not getting that opportunity when they arrive. So a lot of frustrations that emerged from that. So as I mentioned, when newcomers do come, there's a large body of research around this on what happens. So really many of them struggle to find employment. They're less likely to be employed in their intended occupation. They're often underemployed and sometimes unemployed. And that's been a persistent issue over time for many decades. And it also aligns well with the way that the policy has changed over time in how we accept and select and accept newcomers to come to Canada. But I think the overarching argument is that when newcomers arrive, they are less likely to be employed in jobs that align with their skills and qualifications. And what that means is their wages and pay is quite low, which places them in a lower SES status than when they first immigrated, and that it can take up to 20 years for them to catch up. And so that's really a long time to be in a new place, struggling to find employment and struggling to regain your status, I would say, as a newcomer here in Canada. So that becomes difficult. As I mentioned, integration does occur locally. So once the immigrant has, made it past that first stage, they've been accepted and admitted to Canada, then really they make the choice on where they want to live when they arrive. And over time, many, many newcomers gravitate toward those large metropolis centers. And really there's this idea that first, it's a known place. There are other ethnic groups that live within those larger centers that they're attracted to. But there's also this idea that there are greater employment opportunities in the larger centers. And so what we found is that there may be opportunities, but sometimes those opportunities aren't in the professions and jobs that these immigrants are interested in or are looking for. Another important thing that's happened in Canada more recently, has been this idea of regionalization. So because immigrants are really drawn toward those large centers, there's been quite a burden placed on the systems within those. It's usually the three largest, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. And so what happened in the early 2000s is the ministry, which was at the time was Citizen Immigration Canada, decided to implement more of a regionalization policy, which is to try to attract and disperse newcomers into the smaller urban centers across the country, just to reduce some of that pressure that was sort of facing those larger centers, which is great, and it has had an impact. Those patterns have shifted. There are more, I think in 1980, the stat is 75% of newcomers that arrived were settling in the three largest centers, and then more recently, that's shifted down to about 60%. So there has been an impact in that policy. The challenge has been that the smaller centers have not been given the funding and resources to build up their systems so that when they're welcoming newcomers, they have the infrastructure in place to support them when they arrive. And so there's been a gap there where we see the policy hasn't aligned well from the federal down to the local. So this study is based on a case study, on a case example of one city. We chose to take a systems approach because the interest was really to move and shift the focus away from the individual. A lot of the literature does place attention and focus on the individual and things that the individual can do to improve their opportunity for employment. And really what that does is just place additional burdens on the immigrant. Rather, what we wanted to do was sort of shift this focus away from that, take that systems level approach and thinking to look for opportunities, challenges, gaps, areas that we can improve at the system level that could then have a better effect, or more importantly, a positive effect on immigrants when they arrive. So we use this definition of employment integration, and there's a lot of definitions in the literature around economic integration. We've coined this employment integration. It was originally in a paper in 2011 by Bowman et al. But the idea really here is that it's the process of entering the labor market efficiently, effectively, and with productive employment. And what we mean by productive employment is full-time employment. So it's not just about entering the system and obtaining any type of employment or entering the system maybe in your intended occupation, but in a part-time capacity or a casual capacity. It's about getting into the system in your intended occupation, in a full-time position with benefits and the whole package. And so that's really what productive employment means in this case. So why the city of Guelph? So I don't know if I mentioned yet, but we chose the city of Guelph as our case study, and for many reasons. So really, it's a mid-sized city. It's a growing city here in southwestern Ontario. Its proximity to the large urban centers make it quite attractive for people because you could easily move to the city and travel, 30 minutes to Kitchener-Waterloo for employment. You could travel 45 minutes down Highway 6 to Hamilton for work. And so there are opportunities there. There are a lot of opportunities there for newcomers. It also has seen quite a growth in immigration. So we are sitting at about 22% of the population now is newcomers, or immigrants, not newcomers, but immigrants in Guelph. So really growing in that regard. It also is one of the cities that has the lowest unemployment rate across Canada. And so the idea there is that, you know, really if you are looking for a job and you come to Guelph, you'll find a job. There are jobs there for you. And so I thought that's an interesting case to evaluate. Well, what does that look like for a newcomer who is, you know, struggling to find employment? Is the integration more effective, more efficient in this particular city? What is it about the city that provides that opportunity for newcomers, if in fact that is the case, which I'll tell you in a minute whether it was or not. There's also been a lot of targeted employer-based initiatives in the city. Now, the city itself is driven by manufacturing as the largest industry. So some of those initiatives are based in the manufacturing sector, but there has been a lot of like immigrant recruitment campaigns that happen that have come out of the city. There's also been, in the past 10 years, a lot of interest in refugees and integrating refugees into the city. And so all these different things, and those are employer-based initiatives as well. So all of these things sort of led us as a team to select Guelph as a potential case study to understand some of these issues. So as I mentioned, we took a systems thinking approach, really to move this idea away from the individual, but also because when individuals arrive and they may be in a certain profession or they may be looking to work in a certain occupation and they go to apply to jobs, a lot of times they're told, well, a number of things, but one is that they don't have Canadian experience, and another is that their skills aren't matching the type of skills that the employer requires here in Canada. And so what's emerged has been these bridge training programs here in Ontario. What those bridge training programs do is they offer courses and upskilling for newcomers so that they can get to that standard, that Canadian standard that's set by the employer to integrate into employment. But what we found is that with those bridge training programs, again, it places the onus on the individual. They're often costly. They're run by, you know, oftentimes private institutions that are making these promises to the individual, and then the employer still doesn't recognize them. So really, the thinking is, let's move away from this idea that the immigrant is a deficit, has some deficit in their skill, but instead think about it as, wait a minute, maybe our system has some deficits and we can improve that. So the tool or the methodology under our systems thinking approach is what's called a systems map. And what this does is it looks at all the different pieces in the system, the components. So who are the main stakeholders, the main groups in the system, how are they connected? Where might there be some gaps that we can identify areas for improvement? And how does that all kind of fit together under these different systems, which are federal, provincial, and then also local. So really that was sort of the approach we chose to take. I'm going to just present the key findings. So we've only really had 10, 12 minutes. Now I know I have a little bit more time, but I'm going to skip over some of the methodology. But if you're interested in it, the paper does have a more extensive explanation of what that methodology looks like. But I'll show you what our systems map where we landed on this for immigrants. So what we did is we went in, we used peer-reviewed grey literature, we interviewed different groups. So there were NGOs, we interviewed the people at the municipality. There's 80 local immigration partnerships across the country. So we focused on the Guelph one. We talked to them, we talked to immigrant services, settlement services, and we talked to employers. And then we mapped it out. So we created this sort of map where we made these connections based on the information that was given to us by the different groups. And then we fed it back to them and we said, can you check this? Does this make sense? Are you seeing that these connections are accurate? The dotted lines are they solid lines? Are you directly working with these people? Are you, do you have formal partnerships or is it more indirect? And so we were able to do some of that member checking with the map and then finalize it before we landed here. And so this is, so not to, you can take a look at it. Again, it's in the paper. I just wanted to show you the visual of how complex the system is and how complex it emerged for the people speaking about it as well. But what I want to focus on really are just some of the challenges and opportunities that were identified by those different groups that we interviewed. And we did interview immigrants as well, which was published in a different paper. I can speak to that a little bit later. But So in terms of challenges, what most of the service providers argued, and most meaning there are only 2 of them. So in the city of 165,000, there's 2 service providers, settlement service providers. But what they said is that the problem for them is that it is episodic and limited funding. So what happened in Canada is that there was this devolution of responsibility from the federal government to the nonprofit sector for settlement services. So it moved away from government onto the nonprofit. So all these different nonprofits emerged around to create settlement services, but they're based on contractual funding, and that funding can be 3 to 5 years. So every 3 to 5 years of that funding cycle, they're competing against other nonprofits in order to be funded to basically to maintain their shop. And so what happens is that it makes it difficult to work together when you're actually in competition for funding to ensure that you sort of keep your lights on, right? So some of that was a challenge, and they did identify that. Another challenge that they identified really was lack of timely data, and actually I think Kanchu was going to present on data, so it's too bad we missed that one. But really the data that is available is old. So census data is often what most will say they refer to, and we know, if you're talking about what's happening today, based on 2021 census data, that's quite different, I think, and so that was some of the challenges. Now, there is an open government data portal where you can go in and get monthly reports on newcomers that are arriving and their intended location of settlement. But I myself, as a researcher, tried to go in to use that portal, and it was really cumbersome and really difficult to extract. So the settlement services said, look, we don't even know who's coming to the city. We have no way of finding them outside of trying to run campaigns to advertise that they exist. And so the people that were coming and accessing those services was often through word of mouth, and that was the way that they were informed of the different services available to them. So that was a big issue. They felt that they could do better and provide better service if they had access to timely data. That ties into the reaching all the immigrants. So again, a lot of the immigrants fell through the cracks. They weren't able to access the people probably that needed the most help in finding jobs. And when we did the interviews with the immigrants, there was a mix of economic and family class. And surprisingly, the family class immigrants had no idea about settlement services, none at all. Like the economic class, at least they had sort of sought out and were trying to build professional networks and eventually found their way. But with the family class, they were relying on their family. And if their family here didn't know that there were these services available, then they often were missed entirely with some of that. Some of the other challenges from the employer side was the inadequate supply of labor. And so, as I mentioned, there was a lot of large manufacturing factories in Guelph that really struggled to find labor for employment, And so I think if anyone you're mostly Southwestern Ontario, you all have heard of Linamar Corporation. It's an international corporation, one of the largest. So they often do these big campaigns to try to recruit. And one of the programs they implemented was, with every new worker that came in, if they referred another worker, they would get a bonus for doing that. And so what happened in the city of Guelph was there was a small group of refugees that had arrived from Eritrea, and they started working in this factory, and then they found out that they could refer more people, and so they started to do that, and it really quickly grew. And so their labor force grew based on this one group, from this one particular region, because they were able to sponsor the people to come, and then those people were given jobs right away in this factory. So it was sort of a strategy that was used by that particular company. The other thing that the settlement services and employment services talked about was the frayed connection with employers. So if you're familiar with the literature and immigration, a lot of discussion is around, well, we have to engage employers and we have to engage the private sector. And so that became a challenge that was identified, and that there were certain employers that were really active and they would seek out help from the settlement services and employment services, but those were often in the manufacturing sector, and they were low-skilled jobs that they were offering to these people. And And then on the flip side, the immigrants that we talked to would say, you know, it's great to have these services available to us, but they seem to push us into these jobs, and that's not the kind of job that I want. But they will tell us, well, that's your entry into the labor market, or just try it for a little bit, you might be surprised. And so it was sort of this challenge on all sides around how do we engage employers and the right kind of employers to help support the newcomers. So there were also a lot of opportunities that were identified from the map and from discussions. Basically, the first is really that if we can get better coordination around all the moving pieces, and the moving pieces being the different services, that the impact on the individual would be more positive, right? And so they really saw that there were some opportunities there. I think the local immigration partnership, unfortunately, is a very small shop embedded within the municipality. It has one full-time program manager, and that's the extent of it. Then the immigrant services, they are a little bit larger, but again, they didn't have sort of the capacity to really make those strong connections as they wanted. So there's opportunities there. I think the other thing that was identified was this flow of information. It's data, but it's also sort of this feedback loop of what's happening out there. So when an immigrant comes in, they might be placed into a position, and then it's sort of keeping track of that. What's happening after? Is that so was that the position that, you know, ideal for them? Did it match their skills and qualifications? What was their experiences? What does the employer see as maybe some of the barriers or challenges, or some of the, you know, opportunities to help advance that individual and some growth? But none of that was happening. But they viewed that it was a possibility, that if there was some better ability to, you know, have that flow of information and come back, do some of that monitoring and evaluation and come back, it could help improve. And then, of course, the argument of service providers having to connect to employers outside the manufacturing sector. There's also a large agri-innovation sector growing in Guelph, which requires more highly skilled individuals, but it's how do they make that connection to those employers to ensure that they have those opportunities available as well. And then I think just continued support for the employer-based initiatives. And I don't know if any of you have heard of the Danby approach, but that was sort of the private entrepreneur who sponsored Syrian refugees to come to the city. He arranged, you know, for 800 volunteers. He ran it like a business. Each volunteer was given a role. They had directors of the volunteers, and they all managed to help support the 200 families. And the driving force behind that was employment. So his belief was that when they arrive, if there's enough supports in place and they can find a job, and a job that works for them, then they will integrate much faster, and they would be, you know, these productive contributing members to society, as sort of what the expectations are of the newcomers. So overall, you know, we tried to answer some of these questions, like what do we think? Do immigrants fare better in smaller centers? Let me see. The answer was that depends. So it really does depend on the center. It depends on the services available. It depends on the industry. You know, lots of it depends, but there are possibilities there. And I think in Guelph, the ingredients are all there. The pieces are all there. It's just trying to put it together and having a bit more formalized relationships and partnerships that can come out of that would have better results. Does size matter? Yeah, it definitely matters. So I do think that immigrants interested in living in some of these smaller centers, and the government's interest to have them settle in smaller centers, is important to recognize, but that there are some challenges with that, and unless more funding comes in to support the centers, then there won't be success. And does one size fit all? Of course not. We all know that. No, not one type of policy or program will work. So really it's focusing on customizing and especially understanding that what a large center needs and what works in a large center is not going to work in a smaller center, smaller urban centers. So overall, I think we did in the paper tried to answer this question. So how can smaller cities integrate newcomers? Really, so developing an immigration strategy, having a strategy at the municipal level. Surprisingly, the City of Guelph did not have that. And so when I did talk to someone in economic development, and then I did talk to the local immigration partnership, they just said that, one person working embedded within this large government system, and they were sort of working alone without really a clear strategy that was embedded within the whole municipality. Again, ensuring that the integration of services, that they're working toward a shared vision, and that shared vision aligns with that local community in order for there to be success, strengthen those relationships, and really align employer needs with the policies and then the different federal and provincial initiatives. But none of this can happen without the increased funding as required, improved access to data, and really the targeted initiatives, as I mentioned, that can be customized for the city.